the Upper Peninsula Abyss. Vaughan McKinley, Ottawa National Forest, Michigan. Solitude was my sanctuary, a balm for a soul rubbed raw by years of greasy diners and the clamor of human need. My name is Vaughan McKinley, and in 2013, I fled that life, managing a chain of roadside eateries where the air stank of fryer oil and desperation, for the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, near the Ottawa National Forest. I wanted nothing but pine trees stretching endless, the occasional deer ghosting through the underbrush, and a quiet so deep I could hear my own thoughts unspool. The cabin I rented was a relic, a one-room shack with a wood stove that coughed smoke and a cot that creaked like old bones. Electricity flickered from a solar panel older than cell phones, and running water was a stream that turned to ice in winter's grip. It was rough, splintered, perfect. For a while, it was exactly how I dreamed. That January morning broke cold, the sunlight a dim smear through the canopy, casting the snow in a shroud of gray. I woke at 6, breath fogging in the chill, and brewed black coffee over the stove, tearing off a chunk of bread I'd baked the day before. Crust hard, inside still soft. My plans were simple. Chop firewood, maybe trek to the lake for ice fishing if it hadn't frozen solid, and keep the world at bay. By mid-morning, I strapped on snowshoes, the axe slung over my shoulder, its weight a comfort as I crunched toward the lake, a mile from the shack. The forest was silent, a January norm, but this quiet gnawed at me. No woodpeckers hammered, no squirrels chattered, no wolves howled in the distance. Just the muffled crunch of snow beneath my feet, swallowed by in stillness that pressed against my ears like a warning. Halfway there, I found it. A patch of snow trampled into chaos, scattered like ash, paw prints crisscrossing in a frantic dance, and a smear of blood melted into the white, red and sickly. Wolves, I thought, a deer taken down in the night. But as I crouched, the scene unraveled that lie. The prints were massive, canine in shape but too large, too deep, pressed with a weight no wolf could muster. More like a bear's, yet the claws were wrong, elongated, precise. The fur wasn't deer, coarse, black, bristly. It prickled my fingers as I held it, my stomach twisting. I stood, axe in hand, the lake forgotten. Something about those tracks whispered wrong, and I turned back, the forest's hush now a weight I couldn't shake. A branch snapped, sharp, deliberate, and I froze, breath caught, eyes darting through the pines. Nothing moved, but the feeling hit. Eyes on me, unseen, unblinking. I'm no coward, years of diner drunks had toughened me. But out here, alone with no backup, number 911, instincts strip you bare. I moved fast, glancing back, the cabin a beacon in my mind, though the trail stretched longer than it should have, trees yawning wider apart. Every creak of snow, every gust, tightened my grip on the axe. When I reached the shack, I bolted the door, a flimsy slab of wood, and stoked the fire, the light fading though it was barely noon. That sensation of being followed clung like damp cold, and I spent the afternoon cleaning my rifle, an old .30-06, its metal a cold reassurance. Dusk fell heavy, and by 7, the first sound came. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a mallet striking earth, rolling from the woods behind the cabin. I killed the lights, peering through the window, the moon's glow painting the clearing in silver. The thumping grew, steady, deliberate, vibrating through the floorboards, my breath fogging the glass. Then I saw it. A figure tall and gaunt, at the tree line, draped in what looked like animal skins, limbs too long, bending at angles that mocked nature. The pounding stopped, replaced by a guttural chuckle. A sound that wasn't human, wasn't beast, but something older, hollowed out by the wild. "Who's there?" I shouted, grabbing the rifle, my voice thin against the silence. It didn't answer, just swayed, head tilting as if amused. I fired a warning shot, the crack splitting the night, but it didn't flinch, just turned and melted into the trees, fluid, predatory. Sleep fled, the fire burned low, every creak amplified. Whispering brushed the window, faint, unintelligible, but when I checked, nothing. Dawn brought no comfort. I convinced myself it was a drifter, a hunter gone mad, though the lie tasted sour. I drove to town, 20 miles down a winding lane, loading up on canned goods, batteries, ammo at the store. Arlon, the grizzled clerk, eyed my haul. "Everything okay, Vaughn?" he asked. I lied, "Yeah, just stocking up," then spilled it. The figure, the noise, the tracks. His face darkened. "You're not the first. Few years back, campers vanished near Ottawa. Sheriff found gear, no bodies. Rumors of a hermit, traps everywhere, hunting folks like game." I laughed, forced, but his words stuck. Back at the cabin, gray clouds promised snow, and midnight brought a new sound, sharp, metallic clanging, like a shovel on rock, from the lake. Rifle and flashlight in hand, I debated, then stepped into the cold, the beam barely piercing the dark. The clanging grew frantic, then stopped as I neared the lake. The flashlight caught a shovel half buried in snow beside a fresh hole, and inside, a body, frozen, wrapped in plastic. My stomach lurched, the light shaking as I stumbled back. Footsteps crunched behind me, soft, deliberate. I spun, rifle up, and there it stood, beyond the beam, draped not in skins but tattered human clothes, a quilt of jackets and shirts stitched together. It lunged, and I fired, grazing its shoulder. It didn't stop. My foot caught the hole's edge, and I fell, rifle skidding away. It loomed, breath steaming, and I swung the shovel, metal cracking its skull. Collapsed. I ran, legs burning, barricading the cabin, reloading with trembling hands. Dawn showed no tracks, no body, just an empty hole. The sheriff's search found traps, rusted snares, pits, but no corpse. Months later, a hiker found a camp deep in the woods. Stolen goods, a journal of rants about cleansing the land, and timelines matching the missing. The body I'd seen wore that stitched jacket. It wasn't just hunting, it was collecting. It's still out there, a shadow I'll never unsee. The Washita Ravine. Trevor Mackenzie, Washita National Forest, Arkansas. The forest was my lifeline, a tether to pull me free from the wreckage of a life spent hunched over keyboards, drowning in the fluorescent glare of Austin's tech sprawl. My name is Trevor Mackenzie, and in 2021, I traded that grind for a cabin in Arkansas's Washita National Forest. A gift from a hunting buddy who'd passed, leaving me a ramshackle sanctuary of weathered wood and rusted nails. The pines here were ancient, their branches interlocking to choke the sunlight, casting the ground in perpetual shadow where moss clung like a living shroud. The quiet was a promise at first, broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant trill of a bird. A balm for a mind frayed by deadlines and screens. But over time, that silence thickened, pressing against my skull, whispering of something unseen, something waiting. Yesterday began as any other, the rhythm of off-grid life, a steady pulse I'd come to rely on. I woke to the gray light filtering through the cabin's single window, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Breakfast was coffee brewed over a propane stove, black and bitter, paired with a slice of bread I'd baked in a makeshift oven, a skill I'd picked up out of necessity. The morning passed in chores, chopping firewood, the axe biting into logs with a satisfying thud, then tending the rainwater filtration system, its pipes gurgling as I cleared debris. By noon, I packed my hunting gear, rifle slung over my shoulder, a knife sheathed at my belt, and set out to check the traps I'd scattered deeper in the woods, a network of snares and steel meant to keep me fed through the lean months. The forest swallowed me as I walked, its density a labyrinth of green and brown, the canopy so thick that sunlight struggled to pierce it, leaving the ground a patchwork of dim pools and shadow. The only sounds were my boots crunching on pine needles and the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. A stillness that should have been peaceful but had begun to feel oppressive, like the woods held their breath, watching. 2 hours in, I reached the first trap, a small snare along a game trail, its wire taut but empty. Twigs nearby were snapped, the dirt clawed at, and I chalked it up to a raccoon or coyote, resetting it with practiced hands. The second trap, a quarter mile on, stopped me cold. It wasn't just empty, it was obliterated. The steel frame was twisted into a grotesque shape. The bait gone, blood smeared across the surrounding leaves and bark in streaks too vivid to ignore. The claw marks gouged into a nearby tree were too deep, too wide, spaced too far apart for a black bear, my first guess, or even a mountain lion my second. My pulse quickened, the rifle's weight a sudden comfort against my shoulder. Then it came, a scream, high-pitched and metallic, slicing through the silence like a blade. It wasn't human, wasn't any animal I'd ever heard, just pure nightmare, echoing from deeper in the woods. My instincts screamed to retreat, to barricade the cabin and wait it out. But the sound came again, closer, sharper, and curiosity, that old fool, overruled common sense. I've always been cautious, a man who weighs risks against rewards, but something about that cry pulled me forward, rifle raised, breath fogging in the chill air. The forest shifted as I walked, growing quieter, darker, the trees leaning in as if to witness what came next. The air thickened with a metallic tang, laced with rot, a stench that coated my throat and made my stomach churn. I knew I shouldn't keep going, but by then, I was too close to turn back. The third trap was gone. Not broken, not damaged, just vanished. The small clearing where I'd said it was a ruin. Trees bore deep scratches, bark peeled away like skin, the ground littered with tufts of coarse black fur and smears of blood that glistened wetly in the dim light. I crouched, fingers brushing a patch of fur. Bristly, unfamiliar, not bear, not deer, not anything I could name. Then I saw the footprints. Massive, twice the size of my boots, with elongated toes tipped in claw marks, pressed deep into the earth as if whatever made them carried an impossible weight. They didn't belong to anything that should walk upright. Yet the stride was human-like, deliberate. My heart thudded, a cold sweat prickling my skin, and without thinking, I followed them, the rifle trembling in my grip. The tracks led to a ravine, its moss-covered walls sloping down into shadow, roots snaking out like skeletal fingers. The stench hit me harder here, a wall of decay that made my eyes water. At the bottom lay a pile of remains. Deer carcasses stripped to bone, rabbits torn apart, and something larger, its shape obscured by the gloom. I edged closer, flashlight beam shaking, and froze. A human skull, fresh, its flesh still clinging in patches, stared up from the heap. My stomach lurched, bile rising, but before I could process it, movement rustled behind me. I turned, slow as death, and there it stood 8 feet tall, its body a mass of matted fur that shifted colors in the dappled light, a grotesque hybrid of human and beast. Its snout was wolfish, too wide, lined with jagged teeth that jutted unevenly, and its hands, disturbingly human-like, ended in curved talons dripping with something dark. It didn't charge, just stared, head tilting as if studying me, its silence more terrifying than any roar. My rifle hung useless at my side, fear rooting me until it stepped forward, jerky and unnatural. I dove aside as it lunged, rolling into the stinking pile, the remains slick against my skin. Scrambling up, I fired, the shot slamming into its shoulder. It staggered but charged, snarls wet and guttural, a sound that vibrated through my bones. I ran, weaving through trees, lungs burning, legs leaden, its breath a rasp growing louder behind me. A root snagged my boot, and I fell hard, rolling to see it loom overhead, jaws gaping. Desperation drove me. I jammed the rifle but into its face, cracking bone, then fired point blank into its chest. It dropped, twitching, and I bolted, not looking back until the cabin's door slammed shut behind me. I sat there, rifle reloaded with shaking hands, every creak a threat. Morning came, and I returned to the ravine. No body, just a blood trail fading into the undergrowth. I packed and left, the forest no longer a refuge. News later reported hikers missing, their mutilated remains blamed on a rogue bear. I know better. It's out there, smart, hunting, waiting for the next fool to wander too deep. The Washita twins. Silas McKinnon, Ouachita National Forest, Arkansas. The city had chewed me up and spat me out. A mechanic's life in Little Rock drained by a divorce that left me hollow. Savings gone. Patience thinner than the grease under my nails. My name is Silas McKinnon, and in 1987, I bought a cabin in Arkansas's Ouachita National Forest, sight unseen, 30 miles from the nearest paved road. No electricity, no water. Just a shack of warped wood and a promise of solitude I craved like air. I'd always been handy, and building something from scratch, alone among the pines, felt like a way to stitch myself back together. For a while, it worked. The forest's rhythm, its rustling leaves and distant coyote howls, a comfort against the silence of my own thoughts. That summer, though, the air turned heavy, thicker than July's usual swamp, and the woods shifted. Night brought sounds, not raccoons scavenging or owls calling, but deep, resonant thuds, like something massive moved through the underbrush. I'd tell myself it was deer, a bear rummaging, but the lie rang hollow when you're alone, miles from help, with only your own heartbeat for company. One evening, I sat on the porch, beer in hand, the sun dipping low, casting shadows that stretched too far, too dark. 50 yards out, where the trees thickened, I saw it. A shape, upright, tall, partially hidden by brush. I squinted, figuring it was my mind playing tricks, but it stepped left, clearer now. 7 feet, long arms hanging low, proportions stretched beyond reason, primate-like yet wrong. My stomach tightened, hand reaching for the shotgun propped against the railing. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, voice rough from disuse. It didn't flinch, just crouched, smooth and deliberate, then vanished into the undergrowth, silent as smoke. No branches snapped, no leaves rustled, just gone. Sleep eluded me, the cabin's creaks a chorus of nerves. I barricaded doors and windows, shotgun loaded, telling myself it was a drifter, a trick of light. Dawn drove me out to check. Soft ground from recent rain held tracks. Elongated, four-toed, claw marks digging deep, strides too long for a man, feet twice my boots. I rigged a perimeter. Fishing line and tin cans, a poor man's alarm, knowing it wouldn't stop whatever I'd seen. 2 nights later, the cans clanged, jolting me awake, heart hammering. Shotgun in hand, I crept to the door, the moon casting a silver glow. The cans glinted, disturbed, 20 yards out, but the clearing was empty. I scanned the tree line, sweat slicking my palms, and there it stood, taller now, gangly at the property's edge. Then a second appeared, smaller, twitchy, its movements erratic. I yelled, "Leave my land!" And it tilted its head, slow, eerie, as if puzzled, then strode off hypnotic, vanishing into the dark. I drove to town, a bumpy ride to a gas station payphone, calling Hank Tyler, a hunting guide who'd seen it all. He arrived that afternoon with his nephew Travis, rifles in tow. I showed them the tracks, the cans, told them everything. Hank's face stayed stone, Travis smirked, skeptical, young. We staked out that night, them on the porch, me inside, peering through a window crack. Midnight brought silence, no crickets, no owls, just a held breath. Travis whispered, and they tensed. 2 figures emerged, one tall, one twitchy, edging closer. Hank and Travis flanked them, rifles up. The larger charged, a blur of speed, Hank's shot echoing, barely slowing it. Travis fired, hitting its shoulder. It swiped, knocking him down. A guttural scream, not animal, not human, twisted my gut. Hank shot its chest, dark fluid oozing, not red. I fired at the smaller one lunging at me, dropping it. The big one fled, trailing black. Dawn led us to a cave. Bones littered the ground, animal and human. Walls smeared with dark fluid, crude drawings of tall figures over smaller, human shapes. The last creature ambushed, claws slashing Hank. We killed it, burned the cave, dragging Hank to safety. He lived, barely. More bones surfaced later, poachers, they said. I stayed a while, then left, the forest a stranger's domain. Hell's Canyon Butcher. Evan Healy, Hell's Canyon, Idaho. Hell's Canyon was my reset, a firewood gig in Idaho's wilds after Denver's corporate grind broke me. I'm Evan Healy, and in 2018, my days were simple. Chop, haul, stack, nights quiet with whiskey and a paperback by the wood stove. That day, I loaded my Ford Ranger with logs for a bed and breakfast 20 miles down a dirt road carved into cliffs above the Snake River. Raw, vast, humbling. Russell, the wiry owner, loved local legends. Wendigos, skinwalkers. But he wasn't there, the place empty off-season. I stacked the wood, left a note, and noticed tire tracks, fresher, wider than mine. Veering into the woods, a sharp, acrid stench trailing them. Curiosity pulled me, flashlight in hand, following the tracks as trees thickened, the smell growing, burnt, wrong. Half a mile in, I found a rusted van, windows blown out, interior blackened, bones scattered among ashes. Human, some flesh still clinging. I gagged, backing away, when footsteps crunched on leaves. I sprinted to the truck, nearly veering off the canyon, reaching the ranger station as dusk fell. Carol, the ranger, called deputies Coors Burley and Anders Wiry, who rode back with me. They inspected the van, found barefoot tracks leading deeper, too deep for a survivor. Hours passed, then screams. Anders' voice, cut by a wet thud. Coors stumbled out, bloodied, gasping, "Go!" Anders' body dragged behind a massive man. 6'6", ragged, machete gleaming. He swung as I floored it, shattering my window. Police found Coors dead, Anders torn, more graves years old. The Canyon Butcher, they called him, a drifter preying on the lost. I fled, his grin a shadow I can't shake. The Huron Dogman. Lane Parnell, Huron National Forest, Michigan. In 2008, I, Lane Parnell, sought clarity in Michigan's Huron National Forest after a life of bad decisions. Construction, mechanic work, all dead ends. Hunting deer and trading pelts kept me going. My cabin 5 miles from G, a retired postal worker with beer and stories. A humid June morning showed a torn-up deer path. Traps later crushed, massive tracks with 5 clawed toes nearby. That night, claws raked my cabin. A coyote-faced thing leapt from the roof, vanishing fast. It returned, killing G, his torso split, arm dangling. Shots drove it off, howls echoing. Campsites later showed mauled bodies, bare, they said. I left, the forest its domain, a shadow pacing still. From Ottawa to Huron, the wild bear scars, gouged wood, tracks, torn flesh. Something relentless stalks these woods. Could you sleep with only a rifle, hearing thumps? Would you walk those trails, knowing what watches? The forbidden excavation dares you to face it.